Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The Supreme Court hands a big win to President Obama and a cutting defeat to opponents of his signature health care law. In a 6-3 ruling today, the justices upheld a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, preserving subsidies that millions use to pay for coverage and allowing the largest government-sponsored health insurance expansion in decades to remain intact. In its landmark decision, the court said that federal subsidies are legal under the law. And with that ruling, shares of hospital stocks took off. HCA, Tenet, Community Health, and Universal Health Services all gained at least 7%, with some rising double digits and hitting new all-time highs. The same was true for insurers like United Health, Anthem, Cigna, Humana, and Aetna, which saw their shares rise as well. Hampton Pearson has more on the ruling, the scathing dissent by one of the justices, and the reaction in Washington.
ACA is here to stay. ACA is here to stay.
Jubilant supporters of the Affordable Care Act emerged from the Supreme Court after the High Court upheld nationwide tax subsidies that preserve health insurance for millions of Americans. It's the second time President Obama has won a constitutional challenge to his most significant domestic achievement.
And today, after more than 50 votes in Congress to repeal or weaken this law, after a presidential election based in part on preserving or repealing this law, after multiple challenges to this law before the Supreme Court, the Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
In a 6-3 ruling, the justices said the subsidies that more than 8 million Americans now receive to make health insurance more affordable do not depend on where they live. Opponents argued a strict reading of the law said those subsidies should only be available through state-run exchanges. But Chief Justice John Roberts, speaking for the court majority, disagreed. Quote, "Those credits are necessary for the federal exchanges to function like their state exchange counterparts and to avoid the type of calamitous result that Congress plainly meant to avoid." Justice Antonin Scalia delivered a blistering dissent. So it rewrites the law to make tax credits available everywhere. We should start calling this law SCOTUS Care. SCOTUS is the acronym for the Supreme Court of the United States. On Capitol Hill, House Speaker John Boehner said Republicans will continue efforts to repeal the law.
It's raising costs for American families. It's raising costs for small businesses. And it's just fundamentally broken.
In the 5 years since the Affordable Care Act became law, more than 10 million people have signed up for health insurance. More than 6 million people in 34 states will now keep their subsidies as a result of today's Supreme Court ruling. Still to come in the remaining days of this term of the United States Supreme Court, a possible landmark decision on same-sex marriage. Hampton Pearson, Nightly Business Report at the Supreme Court.